All right. Well, good evening and welcome to. I just got to apologize. I apologize to Alan when he came in. I want to apologize to y'all. It's going to be confusing a little bit because our lesson and weeks are off. We are in lesson number 4, but week number 5 in our study of Between the Testaments, the intertestamental period. As you know, we took 2 weeks with one of our lessons, so that's the reason that we are behind, and I will do my very best not to get us any further off of our schedule. Tonight, though, we're going to be looking at Antiochus IV and the forced Hellenization of Judea and what that has in store for the Jewish people, and really and truly, class, how that plays an impact on the New Testament and how we understand the relationship between the two most recognized groups of people of the New Testament. If you had to just speak of the two most recognized groups of people in the New Testament, of course, you would say they're what? Jews and Gentiles, right? Well, this is going to help us. I promise you, this will help you to understand that relationship just a little bit better. Now, as we look here, going forward here tonight, this is an important time frame because if we don't understand the history that takes place during this time period, it would be very easy for us to overlook or underestimate or not even really completely understand the fullness of some of the passages of Scripture that you might think aren't even related to this time frame at all. But I promise you, you'll understand eventually how they are related. Passages that Cliff and I spent a great amount of time on. Romans chapter 14, Romans chapter 15. You don't understand it right now unless you've already studied this, but there is a great correlation between the writings of the Apostle Paul in Romans 14 and 15 and how the events of this time period played into what Paul would have to deal with. So those passages, I've seen preachers and teachers either misappropriate those passages or interpret them the wrong way just simply because they lacked of understanding of what the text is actually talking about. And that all stems from the time frame we're going to be covering. So that's just a little bit of a taste of what we're going to be discussing at the end here tonight. But I thought it'd be a good idea to have a quick recap. We have been talking about the Greek empires. We talked about Alexander the Great and how he took on that immense Persian Empire, how he conquered it against all odds, that massive empire, and how it eventually would be known as the Greek Empire. Poor Alexander the Great, right? You think about doing all that work to conquer and have that great accomplishment, and you don't even get to enjoy it very long, do you? Because he died shortly thereafter, after the conquest, only in his early 30s. And then, as we talked about last week, the kingdom was split into what? How many what was the kingdom split into? Can anybody recall? 4. That's right. 4 generals who would war with each other for about 40 years until the lines were eventually drawn up. But they were going to continually fight with one another. And of course, the 2 strongest that emerged was the Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt and the Seleucid kingdom, which is centered around Babylon. Last week it was asked about, where exactly Babylon is at. Well, look at the Seleucid kingdom. There you go. Susa, Antioch, would become the capital city in what we now know as modern-day Syria. So when you're thinking about Syria today, remember this particular area. During the wars that would take place between 320 BC and 300 BC, this is what's interesting. Jerusalem is going to change hands, we know of, at least 7 times. Imagine being a citizen in Jerusalem and undergoing a rule change. The people who were your rulers 7 times in a span, a period of time. At least 7 times they found themselves as the border between the two most powerful Greek kingdoms, as I said, the Ptolemaic kingdom and the Seleucids. The Ptolemies centered in one place and one place only, and we talked about that last week, Alexandria, Egypt, right? And the Seleucids were centered in a place, New Testament Christianity we know quite well. Starts with an A. What would that be? Antioch, right? Antioch is in Syria. If you just draw a line between Antioch in Syria to Alexandria, Egypt, it's not a straight line, but you get what I'm saying. Eventually, you got to go through where? Jerusalem, Judea, right? You're going to go straight through. Now, you could go around the water, right? But most of the time, they didn't want to do that with a mass number of troops. So they would go right through Judea. And that's going to make a difference for folks living in Jerusalem. It's a very hotly contested place because they're a buffer zone between two major powers. It's going to be a source of conflict and uprisings and uneasiness for that population. For 120 years, the Ptolemies ruled over Jerusalem. That would be somewhere around 301 BC to 198 BC. You may hear me waffle a little bit on that number, but just generally 301 BC to about 198 BC. Now, however, in 200 BC, Antiochus the Great, that would be Antiochus III, becomes the king of the Seleucid Empire. He's probably, if you're just, and we ought to do this sometime, just sit down and rank all of these rulers. It'd be interesting who you might choose as we do this study, who you might put where in that ranking. But I would say that Antiochus III, if I were going to tell you where I'd rank him right underneath Alexander the Great. I would put him right in that second or maybe third spot. At this point, he is the best since Alexander the Great. He actually takes the Seleucid Empire, makes it more wealthy, expands the borders significantly, takes that strip of land all the way that we just mentioned, going all the way through Jerusalem, all the way to Egypt, and he puts the Ptolemies in their place, and then he sets his sights on the next great conquest. Would you like to guess what that is?
Greece.
Greece, because you probably see it on your sheet. But that's good. That's why I do it.
I'm just that smart.
I love students like that. Now, when he invades Greece, mainland Greece, in 190 BC, he is actually going to be met by a confederation of Greek kingdoms, and add to that some Mediterranean kingdoms, including this up-and-coming place that nobody has heard of yet, with a big R word. Nobody's really heard of them yet, but it's Rome. Rome is not the Rome that you know about in the New Testament. It is not yet to that immense name. He is actually defeated. Imagine going on this conquest and remembering all the victories that Alexander the Great had, and yet he goes and he's actually defeated in 2 very decisive battles, and is forced, I think, really is forced to sign a peace treaty and head back home. So whenever that happens, historically, if you try to invade a country like this, kingdom, and you lose, guess who gets to pay the bill for the damages that are incurred because of the battle? The loser, right? The loser does. So he ends up owing like a significant amount of money to both these Greek kingdoms and to the Republic of Rome. But guess what happens? He's going to die. So he's going to kind of get out of it in a way. After he dies, his son is going to take over the throne. That son is Seleucus IV Philopator. and he rules from 187 BC to 175 BC. And let me tell you, if you were a Jew, you liked Seleucus because he was lenient. He was just like his father, Antiochus the Great. Most of his, I'll tell you why we don't hear a lot about him, because most of his reign was spent paying off all the money that his father had rang up in his failed attempt to go over and deal with the Greeks, okay? So he owes all that money. For 12 years, he rules, but nothing really happens during Seleucus the Fourth Philopator's reign. He just was a figurehead king, but spent most of his time having to pay bills. Not a very amazing name for him. Now, if you look here on this map, this should be slide 5, right? All right. You see now the reign of a new name, Antiochus the Fourth. Now, I'm going to give you something here to think about. It's either Epiphanes or Epiphanes. Either way, a lot of folks would say it's Epiphanes instead of Epiphanes. I kind of go with Epiphanes just because that's the way I always heard it in school. But either way, Antiochus the Fourth, Epiphanes. Here on this map, you can see the region of Antiochus. Okay, you see Egypt down there in kind of the burnt orange color. I didn't do that for Texas. You see kind of the lime green there, the Seleucid Empire. Then above that, in that lighter kind of yellow color, you see the independent Greek Armenian kingdoms. When Antiochus IV takes over for his brother, who is assassinated by Heliodorus in 175 BC, Antiochus IV, Epiphanes, comes to the throne. And when he came to the throne, you can see here that they're already in control of the land where Judea sits. See how it's kind of in that lime green color? So they already control that area. But Egypt and the Ptolemies are still a very large and powerful empire. And like I said, in the north, you've got those independent Greek Armenian kingdoms. Mainland Greece is also being ruled by just some other individuals. So Antiochus IV takes the throne. His birth name, by the way, I think I put it on here. Do y'all see it on there on your notes anywhere there? It starts with an M. It's
where it says the new name.
there it is. Mithridates. I don't know. I didn't ever get that pronunciation. I apologize. I'll just say that's a good classical Greek name. If you want to know a classical Greek name, that's a good classical Greek name for you. But with a name like that, he goes, I don't like that. So he changes his name to Antiochus, which is what basically most kings would do when they came to power, is change their name. So you think about it, you become the king of the Ptolemaic kingdom, you would take on what name? Remember, Ptolemaic is Egypt, so what name would you take on? Pharaoh, that's right. When you become the king of the Seleucid Empire, you would become Antiochus. So 1, 2, 3, now 4. But he's got to have a name because there are all kinds of Antiochuses, if that's even a word. So he chooses to add Epiphanes to the end. So Antiochus IV, Epiphanes or Epiphanes. What does that name mean? I find it interesting. It means God manifest. In other words, the one who is like God. Sounds like a really humble guy. No, he's an arrogant individual, let me tell you. He's self-centered. I'll tell you, from my studies, he's a demented individual. He's cruel. He chooses a name that, sounds pretty braggadocious, the manifestation of God. Others will call him, by the way, Others will call him behind his back, Epimenides, okay? Epimenides, which sounds a little familiar to Epiphanes, right? But that means the mad one or the manifestation of crazy. That's what that means. So imagine you call yourself Epiphanes or Epiphanes, and people come in behind you and say, no, it's actually Epimenides, which means the manifestation of a crazy man. So he begins ruling in 175 BC, and he's actually a decent ruler in the very beginning. He decides, okay, I'm going to invest my time and my energy. We got to grow our military back. Our military is taking a lot of beatings. Our numbers are down, so let's grow the military. Any good, you think about it, and throughout history, many good rulers, the first thing they do is rebuild their militaries. They make preparations for potential wars, etc. Well, he begins to prepare for the invasion of the Ptolemies. He wants to invade the Ptolemaic kingdom. And so he decides, let me go ahead and get this started. So if you notice here on the screen, y'all see the coin? You see the coin there? This is the actual image of a coin that was minted in this time frame, and that is the image of Antiochus IV. And this is the one that is talked about in Daniel chapter 11, beginning in verse 21 and ending in verse 45. We're not going to read that tonight for the sake of our time, but I would highly, highly, highly encourage you to read that either tonight or sometime later this week. The Bible, through Daniel, is going to prophesy what is going to take place in the life of Antiochus IV Epiphanes, and with incredible accuracy. So much so that, like I said last week, critical scholars are like, well, that had to be added later on. There's no way that somebody could get that right. And so the next slide here talks about this. A lot of critical scholars spent a lot of time trying to attack this predictive prophecy and say it's impossible. It's impossible for Daniel to know the future the way it happens, because nobody can know the future the way it happens. So this has just got to be some later Jewish addition to the writings of Daniel. But for those of us that believe that God could prophesy through a man like Daniel and be able to prophesy something that happened hundreds of years later, that's no problem for me. I don't know about y'all, but I believe that God gave Daniel the ability to prophesy these events in the way that they would go. So if you have a chance to read Daniel 11, 21 through 45, I think that would be a good idea. Now, on the right-hand side of your slide, you see this bust that is on display over in Europe, even to this day, a bust, a likeness of Antiochus IV. And so here he is. At this point, he's really starting to gain some momentum. His ego is starting to grow, so he thinks, okay, right now's the time. I am going to invade Egypt. I am going to attack the Ptolemaic kingdom. And he thinks, you know what? Nobody before me has ever been able to live up to Daddy. And Daddy, the ultimate Daddy, was who? Alexander the Great, right? But his daddy, as I said, was the second greatest in terms of the folks that followed Alexander the Great. So in this case, what my daddy couldn't get done, guess what? I can get it done. My daddy failed when it came to attacking Rome and the Greek kingdom, but I am not going to fail. I am better than my father. His brother, as I said, didn't have any ambition to do this because he's too busy paying off bills. But not Antiochus IV. He's God manifest. The first step in being able to do what his father couldn't do. I know this sounds strange, but let me make sure you understand. The first step in being able to do what his father couldn't do was, first you got to go back and take care of the Ptolemies. You got to invade Egypt first. You need to have Egypt, because remember what I told you last week about Egypt. They got the money. They got resources that you need. So let's talk about Egypt for a moment here. Egypt is at this point the second largest, second most wealthy, perhaps the wealthiest of all the kingdoms. And if you can take out the second largest power in the world at that time, then he thought, I'm just going to walk through mainland Greece, no problem, because at this point, mainland Greek kingdoms are fighting with the Romans. That has started. And so, their former ally that stood against his father is not on their side anymore like they were. So they're maybe ripe for the pickings. So he invades Egypt. And I'll just tell you, he had incredible success. He captures nearly all the kingdom. I'd say probably at least 90% of the land. He captures the Ptolemaic king. And the only thing that he lacked was the chief city and the capital of Alexandria. He's got it all. He's even got the king of the kingdom. It's just a formality. I just got to do one thing. I got to capture the capital city. That's how many of you get a milkshake? You got to have the cherry, right? You got to have the cherry, right? This is his cherry on the top of his milkshake. So he's getting his troops ready, and they're about to go into Alexandria, Egypt. But before he can go in, he's met, and the timing of this has always blown me away. Right before he's about to go in, he's met by a Roman delegation. Remember, this is not the Rome that we're talking about in the biblical days, right? When we think about Caesar and Augustus and Hadrian and conquering, this is 150 years at least before Rome is at their top, or even as many as 180 years before what we see in the first century. So this Roman delegation comes to Antiochus IV. And again, he thinks he's the most powerful man on this planet. And this Roman group is led by a man by the name of Gaius Popilius Linnaeus. Okay? Gaius Popilius Linnaeus. And he goes to Antiochus. And Antiochus reaches out his hand to the delegation. And this old proconsul, he takes from his pouch and sticks a letter into Antiochus IV's hand. Okay? Now, this is just odd. I tried to put it here on your screen or on your slide to see this. That's not usually how you greet the most powerful king of the Seleucid Empire. That just conquered the Ptolemies except for the capital city. How might you normally expect a Roman proconsul, a Roman delegation, how would you normally expect them to come before a man like this?
Fear and submission.
Yeah.
This is the same Rome that had allied with Greece to defeat his father Antiochus III.
But at this point in time,
now
they're
with the Egyptians.
Right. At this point in time, they're not on the same page anymore. Okay.
Okay.
They've actually been fighting for a while.
Of course they were.
So he sees the letter, and the Roman delegation says, "You need to read this letter." And he says, "Okay, there's got to be something up here. I'm going to call my council, and we'll discuss the letter, and then we'll get back to you guys. We'll let you know something." So then that old proconsul, he takes out his sword. And he takes that sword, and as you see here on the page, he draws a circle around, and I couldn't make it look right. He's outside of the circle on the thing, but he draws a circle around Antiochus. And think about it. This is a guy who's bullied everybody his entire life. And this old man, with the name Gaius Popilius Linnaeus, draws with his sword a circle with Antiochus IV in the center of that circle. And he says, you're not going to leave this circle until you give us an answer. And if you leave this circle before you answer us, let me tell you what, you're going to war with Rome. So he opens up that letter, and the letter states that the Romans have put their claim on Alexandria, Egypt, which is the capital city of Egypt, and that they have backed the Ptolemaic king and demand that Antiochus IV quit his invasion, restore the Ptolemaic king back to his rightful place, and head back home. So here's Antiochus in this moment standing in the middle of this circle, and he has a decision to make. In his mind, he thinks I'm the most powerful man on this planet. And he could or he could not, he might be right, he might be wrong, right? But he's living in the shadow of his father. And he may play a big game, but who really knows if he's really and truly as good as his dad was? Antiochus the Great was called Antiochus the Great for a reason, right? Just like Alexander was the Great for a reason. So he's got to make a choice. Fight with the Romans, roll the dice. They beat my father. Can I beat them? He thinks about it and says, I got to go back home. The guy who had bullied everybody in his entire life on the biggest stage gets bullied by somebody else, and he decides to go home, even though, class, the Romans are smaller in every facet at all. They're smaller than the Seleucid Empire at this point. The question is, if they would have went to war at this particular point in history, the question is what? What's the question with any war? Who would have won? Maybe the Romans, maybe not. And if he had went to war, I will tell you, history would have, wow. History would have greatly changed. You don't know, like we don't know who would have won the war, but if they had gone to war and he had won in this particular manner, history would have been changed. But we'll never know. So his dreams are shattered, and his facade of being this God manifest, now he goes back home and everybody's making fun of him. They're calling him by that other name. And so he withdraws from Egypt. He goes into kind of seclusion, and yet, let me make sure you know something. The whole moment that he's gone back home, he's plotting, he's planning, he's looking for vengeance. Okay? So keep that in mind. Again, what sits right between Egypt and the Seleucid Empire? Jerusalem, right? I wonder how they're going to play into this. I wonder how they are going to play into this. So victory is ensured. Victory is certain. This is going to be the biggest thing since Alexander came into the Middle East and just rolled up everybody. Remember how he went from, across the Great Plains of the Seleucid, of the Persian Empire, and just wiped them? People back in Jerusalem are watching what has gone down here. The Jews know what's going on. They know that he had already captured the king. He'd captured 90% of the land. There's not really an army in Alexandria to really fend him off. And then they just imagine you're sitting in Jerusalem and you're waiting to hear the news that Alexandria has been taken by Antiochus IV. And you're sitting there, you don't have internet at that time, you don't have newspaper, you don't have radio. So how are you going to learn that something has changed. Guess what you're going to see coming back through Jerusalem?
The same army that went through the first one.
There you go. And so just imagine them had to get their attention to see this big bad man with this big bad army turn tail and book it back, to Antioch. A rumor goes out that Antiochus IV, who was no friend of the Jews, I'll tell you that, he was very cruel to the Jews. The Jews had political priests who were political agents. You think about the high priest, right, of Jerusalem. We don't maybe realize it from our biblical studies, but the high priest, especially at this time, played a very important role politically. And so when he came to power, Antiochus, he went and talked to Onias, that's Onias, Onias, who was the high priest at the time. And Onias wasn't a big fan of Hellenization. He deposes Onias, the high priest, who the Jews thought was the rightful descendant of Aaron, and says, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have, what's the best way to get a new high priest? Well, let's have a bidding war. And whoever bids the most, whoever spends the most money, you get your candidate to be the new high priest. That's how it was done in the ancient world. You think about politics today. Who ends up winning most political races today?
The one with the most money.
Yeah, the one who spends the most money normally, right? So, who wants to be the new high priest? Okay. Well, this man by the name of Jason, Jason, all these crazy names. How do we end up with a Jason, right? Jason becomes the high priest. And he's actually a really big fan of Hellenization, unlike what would be his predecessor, right? Onias. He's a really big pusher of casting out all these Jewish customs and laws and becoming more like the Greeks. The Jews are already mad at Antiochus because they feel like he's offended them, and God, he deposed the rightful high priest of Aaron's descendancy. So they're no fan of Antiochus. They end up hearing that Antiochus is dead, and it's almost like the 4th of July. They have a big party. There's parades. They're dancing in the streets. History tells us they even made dummies with Antiochus' name on it and put them in the streets, and they drug them through the streets with their chariots. Guess who finds out on the way home? Antiochus. He gets a letter from the governor of Judea saying, the Jews think you're dead and they are rioting in the streets. How do you think he's going to react to that? Carl, what do you think?
Let them riot.
No?
Not going to be pleased.
He's mad.
Yep.
He's upset. He just got bullied by this old Roman proconsul, and his entire army at his disposal is heading back to Syria. What do you think he's going to do on his way back home? Remember that. On here, if you've noticed, I've given you on the top left corner kind of an image here of Rome. That in the purple, you see the purple, it's hard for me to point it out on mine, but I hope you can see it on yours. That's the size of Rome. They're in the purple. They've already defeated Carthage, as I said last week. We call those the Carthaginian Wars. And they've already taken a hold of Spain and some of those areas of North Africa that used to be holdings of Carthage. A huge decision for Antiochus. He withdraws. He heads back toward the Jews. The Jews are throwing this party in the streets. The Jews hated for the most part, the Hellenization that we've been talking about, and they were bitterly divided over how it should be accepted or received. Antiochus goes back to Jerusalem, and there, in that moment, with the parties going on, they stop really quick, by the way. He kills 40,000 Jews on sight. 40,000 people, history tells us, he killed in a day and a half. There was literally, from all the historical accounts, blood running through the streets. And the little streams, just blood running. He takes an additional 40,000 Jews, beats them, molests them in any and every way possible, and he sells them into bitter slavery. He takes a large population chunk, at least 80,000, and some estimates are even more than that. Takes upward of 80,000 or more Jews out of the population of Jerusalem and kills them or treats them horribly and sells them into slavery. And after that, he says, all right, you didn't like me before. Now you're really not going to like me because those old rules don't apply anymore. Now the rules are going to be twice as worse. You didn't like my Greek culture beforehand. Now we're going to step it up a notch. And that's exactly what he does. And I've listed some of the things that there in the middle section, harsher rules imposed. Do you see that? These are some of the things that he does. You have to understand the desire for forced Hellenization in the ancient world. You know, when the Greeks took over the world, they had an idea. It was Alexander's dream, really. It wasn't just for West prestige and wealth, although that mattered to him. He really felt like he was called by their God to spread their culture and their language and their architecture. That was the way he honored their God. They also felt like they were better than everybody. Their schools were better. Truthfully, they were. Their language had many advantages. Their architecture, you don't have to look very to the architecture of that day. You would agree that their architecture was top of the line. Their clothing was more advanced. That was going to be their gift to the world, was spreading that to other people. To be completely honest with you, in many ways, it was better. It came to these places throughout the ancient Near East, and they were told, we're going to do things. They're going to do things like us now, but in many ways better than us. It's hard for us to understand it, but if you think about it in terms of America, in some ways we're like that. You think about democracy. We think, well, what do we think about democracy in terms of the world stage?
Yes.
We think it's the best, right? And we want to see other people have what we have. So we export our brand to the world. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I'm just saying that we do that.
Quick question.
Yes.
Antiochus IV, or Antiochus IV,
Right.
imposed harsher rules. I actually back a slide, I think.
Yes. Right back here to this one right here.
Jewish laws, customs, and Sabbath are outlawed. Right here.
Mm-hmm.
Pork and unclean foods are sacrificed on the altar.
Yep.
Is that the abomination that causes desolation?
That's what I've always wondered, Alan. I don't know for sure about that, but
Jesus speaks of that.
But again, I think there's a correlation there. But just look at, and those are not all of them. That's just what I could put on the slide. Those are the main ones.
Yeah.
The fact that circumcision was forbidden, today we don't really think about it. You can have your child circumcised if you want to or not, right? But it wasn't even an option for them under Antiochus IV, which, how does that work with a Jew? How are you going to get around that? Well, you would do it in secret ways, which could mean, not easier ways, right? it was hard to hide copies of the Torah. It's not like you can have a little Bible you can stick somewhere, right? Having a copy of the Torah was not easy to hide.
Yeah, they don't have it on flash drive.
No flash drives. See, the Jews, it's hard for us to understand, I think, many times, but most places in that day and time would just adopt Hellenization, and a lot of people just saw it as progress. And they would even thank the Greeks for it. But the Jews weren't like that for the most part. They didn't feel like Greek culture was really any better than their culture. They're not so sure that Greek religion is better, obviously. But they're bitterly divided, as I've said over the last 2 weeks, about this whole Hellenization thing. Whether you're going to take parts of it or reject it as a whole. And so now Jews are fighting amongst each other. They're not just fighting with the Gentiles, they're fighting amongst themselves. But let's talk about two places here for a moment. Two places in particular where you're going to see this take place. One is Alexandria, because in Alexandria, Egypt, if you remember from our previous class, when Ptolemy came to power in 300 BC, remember he took between 100 to 200, I don't know exactly the number. I think I told you 120 or something last week, but it's a general number. Anywhere between 100 and 200,000 Jews were taken to Alexandria, Egypt. And at this point, it's that brand new city. And he promised them 40% of the city would belong to the Jewish population. And he was going to say, you can live as you want. You can work in the city. You can live in the city and you can still do all your Jewish customs. You guys, if you only want to marry within the Jewish race, fine. You want to worship Yahweh? Fine. You want to observe the Sabbath? Fine. As long as you guys are peaceable and you pay your taxes, I don't really care what you do. That's Alexandria, Egypt. In fact, Jews were even able to be public officials, which is interesting. Think about a Jew in that time period being a public official, a government official. And I think about this because you ever notice throughout history, whenever there's tolerance of your religion, how do people often react? When everybody just kind of tolerates your religion and everybody's accepting of your religion, nobody's molesting you because of your religion, and you're just able to do your religion the way you want it done and the timing. What does sometimes happen with the way people treat your religion? Complacency. I think when you're forced, class, to fight for your convictions, you have to make a decision. Is it going to be important enough for me to fight for? Because if it is, then you're going to be more than willing to fight for it. I did a little thing down here on the left-hand side. When I was a sophomore at Heritage Christian University, the school came to me and said, we've got a young man that's coming over from Zimbabwe. And he wants to come here, go to school. And he doesn't know anything about our culture, nothing about, he speaks English, but he doesn't know our culture at all, right? And he comes over here. His name was Haley Malangi. In fact, after we're done with class, I'll show you a picture of him and his family. And he comes over here, and I took him to his first, all he knew, really, I promise you, he knew two things: God and football. But by football, he didn't mean American football. He meant soccer, right? His dad was a preacher there in Zimbabwe. He came over here to do schooling with the intent on going back to Zimbabwe. Well, a lot of the people that I had experienced had come over from Africa. And we come over here, get used to everything, and go, I ain't going back. But he kept telling me, I'm going to go back. And praise God, he did. He went back after he graduated, and he's been there ministering ever since. But like, I remember back around, I'm trying to think what time period it was. I was with him between 99 and 2001. It's just several years ago. Christians in the area of the little villages where his father preached were killed by Muslims for being Christian. And, you know, we may have a random shooting or bombing here in the States, but I'm talking about systematic killing where somebody will come into your village in the middle of the night where you're sleeping and kill your wife and kill your children and kill you because you're a Christian. If you are experiencing something like that, that's a deeper conviction. Do you agree with me? Maybe you would stay faithful. I'm sure that you would. I hope that I would. But I'm just trying to tell you, I think it's a different ball game than what we're accustomed to, right? But I tell you what, a lot of the Christians over there, even today, they're a lot more convicted, I think, about their faith than many Christians are over here because we have it easy. It doesn't really matter, you know, today. I think about for these Jews in Alexandria, it's kind of a similar correlation. Keep the Sabbath? Well, what if I don't? Sacrifice to Zeus every once in a while? All right, no big deal. The end of the day, we're 350 plus miles away from the temple, right? Nobody's really going to care. So I think these Jews in Alexandria, they were living a life where I think maybe their faith started to weaken a little bit. 2 cities, 2 paths. A more lenient policy in Alexandria, Egypt, and a more gradual shift towards Hellenization. Jerusalem, on the other hand, a completely different ballgame. Jerusalem has a lenient Ptolemaic government for 120 years, but now it's found itself under this Seleucid Empire. And then Antiochus IV comes in at 175, and any leniency they had felt is all gone. And it just really began to be a problem. Antiochus begins, as I said, by removing Onias from the high priest position, selling it out. But he also builds gymnasiums. I know this sounds weird because you think, what? We build gymnasiums? No big deal, right? He builds gymnasiums in Jerusalem. He allows Greeks to compete in international Greek games. Jewish men surgically remove the marks of circumcision so that they could compete in those games. I don't know how you explain that, but I'm just telling you it happened. And many Jewish men would do that so they could go to the bathhouses and different other things in the town. So you have this division going on. One person would appeal to the king and culture, while another person would appeal to God and law or custom. So there's this dissent for Antiochus in Jerusalem. But after the Roman rejection, it was already bad beforehand. But I'm telling you, it just got unbearably worse. When he comes back and they're dancing in the streets, they think he's dead, and just the heat gets turned up so much more. Antiochus withdraws from Egypt, from the campaign. As I said, he kills 40,000, treats 40,000 plus brutally. By the way, I didn't tell you this, but he goes into the temple and he absolutely just plunders the temple. The Holy of Holies. the most sacred place for the Jews, right? Where only Levitical priests can go. He goes inside the temple and he takes all the gold, all the silver that he can find. And if you're a Jew, who's he stealing from? Yeah, he's stealing directly from God. Like I said, he goes in the Holy of Holies. He knocks over the altar. He brings in a picture of Zeus and he puts it in the Holy of Holies, in that inner room, right? Where only high priests could go what? Once a year. He just strolls right on in like he owns the place, puts up a picture of Zeus. I'm sorry to tell you, he brings in prostitutes, does things, and says, this is now a temple to Zeus. We're going to make sacrifices to Zeus here. You don't like pigs? I'm sorry. Very first sacrifice, very first night, it's going to be swine. And so he kills these pigs and he spreads the pig's blood all throughout the temple walls, desecrates it. And Alan, it's called the Great Desecration. The Great Desecration. And I think that what you were talking about, I think Daniel 11, the desecration, desecration of the temple, the abomination of desolation, right? I think that's the same thing. I can't tell you for sure, but I think it is. I'll just be honest with you. Most historians say he turned the temple into a brothel.
Did he drop dead instantly?
No, ma'am.
There are those who take that statement regarding that and put it at some futuristic event from us today.
Yeah.
I thought so.
He builds this citadel there beside the temple. And he fortifies the city of Jerusalem and brings in soldiers and grain and supplies. He outlaws any and all worship of Yahweh. Anyone caught worshiping God, Yahweh, is killed on the spot. As I told you, no circumcision, no Torah, no observance of the old law at all, otherwise you're put to death. Any copy he could find of the Torah, any copies he could find, he burned. Anyone who possessed a Hebrew Bible were killed on the spot. If you were a Jew, you could not dress like a Jew. You had to dress like a Greek. He made them take part in festivals and parades for Greek deities. He had inspectors move to every town to look for anybody who disobeyed his orders and demand that everybody make sacrifices to his Greek gods. Things are bad. They just got a whole lot worse. And I've got a question for you, class. What do you think when a people is oppressed like this, what do you think they're eventually going to do? There's eventually going to be a breaking point, right? Let's look at it. And are we on slide 16? Does that match?
From arrogance to atrocity.
Okay.
Yes.
And then martyrdom and hope. They desire martyrdom.
Yes.
Okay. I want to tell you, if you have a chance to read 1st and 2nd Maccabees, anybody ever read 1st and 2nd Maccabees? Now, are they inspired books? No. Are they books that carry good information that Jews relied on? Yes. They're not inspired. They're not part of the canon, but they do have some good benefit for learning Jewish history. I want you to know that, okay? I want to make that clear. If anybody watches this, I'm not telling you that 1st and 2nd Maccabees are inspired or should be part of the Bible, but I would encourage you to read them in this class just to see what I'm telling you is true or not, okay, in terms of the recorded history. Now, whether or not they recorded them exactly right, I can't testify to that, but I want to be accurate to what they wrote. Parents who circumcised their children were killed. In the book of 1st and 2nd Maccabees, stories are told because of parents who were killed because they circumcised their children. Eleazar was this older man who would not eat pork, so they beat him to death in the city streets. There were these 7 brothers who were martyred in 2nd Maccabees chapter 7. So if you ever have a chance to read that, I would encourage you, not for doctrinal things, but for this. If you want to look at it online, there is an NRSV copy of 1st and 2nd Maccabees on BibleGateway.com if you want to look it up. It has a good translation of the Apocrypha, which has 1st and 2nd Maccabees. But in 2nd Maccabees chapter 7 is one of the most well-known stories in all of Jewish culture, and it's about this murder of these 7 sons of this mother. In some of the early churches, the Roman Catholic Church made these sons all saints. You know, the sainthood, the way the Catholic Church does that, right? I say all this to say, again, if you have a chance to read it, it's pretty gruesome. It's pretty gruesome. You may say, Jonathan, why would I want to read that? Because remember, it's interesting to read that passage because you'll see a theme in there that you don't see spelled out very well in the Old Testament, but it's very prevalent in the New Testament. The idea of an afterlife. You know, in the Old Testament, don't talk about heaven or hell. Do you know that? The Old Testament talks very little about an afterlife. Just not a lot of conversation about the afterlife in the Old Testament. But this is written before the Gospels. If the dates are correct, this idea, this concept of the afterlife, written in 1st and 2nd Maccabees, is brought up before the Gospels were even written. If not, at least one of the last redactions of it could have been added. I could, make that statement that maybe it was added after the Gospels, but they're originally written before the Gospels. It's possible that it was added afterwards, but I don't know. But these 7 brothers, they're killed along with their mother. Slide 17. Is this 17? Yeah. The 7 brothers, that was why am I telling you it was the last straw? In 1st Maccabees chapter 2, we have the story of the Maccabean revolt, or the Matthias rebellion, which is eventually going to be called the Maccabean revolt. Crazy oppression. I mean, people are being massacred. And you have this story of, and help me here, Matthias is a priest with 5 sons who move away from Jerusalem, trying to escape the oppression, moves away from Jerusalem to Modian. That's Modein. He moves there, and the text tells us that he's a priest, the son of John, the son of Simeon. In Greek, in which 1st and 2nd Maccabees is actually written, this is about the time of the Hasmonean dynasty. If you've ever read Jewish history, you read about the Hasmonean dynasty. But this is where this all kind of comes out of. The king's official comes to Modian and he asks Matthias, as a high priest and the leading man of the city, to be an example. You need to be an example of the rest of the city and offer a sacrifice to our God on your altar. And if he does so, he's going to be a best friend of the king and receive gold and silver and honor and authority and all this. He comes out and says, look, Matthias, you're the high priest of the town. You do this, you're going to be, everybody else is doing it, so why not, right? But Tony says, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm a high priest to Yahweh God. I can't do it. And another man steps up and says, well, if he won't do it, guess what? I'll do it. And so Matthias goes into a fit of rage and kills that man on the very altar, and then turns and kills the king's officials and tears the altar down. And then he flees to the hills with his sons. And soon others throughout Judea hear about what he's done, and it kind of builds up like this, what word am I thinking about here? Like when you see somebody else do something, you think, well, if they do it, I can do it. So builds this revolt, resistance. And 1 Maccabees chapter 2, verse 27-28 says this: Matthias cried out in the town with a loud voice, saying, let everyone who is zealous for the law and supports the covenant come out with me. Then he and his sons fled to the hills and left all they had in the town. So that is historically believed to be kind of one of the last straws that led up to the Maccabean revolt. Another story that's pretty important is while they were fleeing towards the hills, there was a group of about 1,000 individuals who came out of Jerusalem, and the king's soldiers heard about this large group of people that were going to go join the rebels, and they came upon them on the Sabbath day. Now, why am I telling you this? You got a group of 1,000 people on the Sabbath day who are approached by these soldiers. What are they not going to be willing to do on the Sabbath day? Fight. And so guess what those soldiers did to all those 1,000 plus people who would not fight on the Sabbath day? Just slaughtered them. And so Matthias, being a high priest of sort, says, okay, well, we're going to change the rules. So then from that point forward, it was not unlawful to fight on the Sabbath. Why is that important? Well, if you come back next week, if I hadn't bored you to death tonight, I promise you, if you come back next week, you'll find out why that's important. If you can't work on the Sabbath, right? If you can't even make a fire on the Sabbath, can you fight on the Sabbath? Well, after 1,000 people are killed because they don't fight on the Sabbath, Matthias realizes, well, if we're going to win this war, we got to fight on the Sabbath. And so they do that. Here on the map, you see Jericho, Jerusalem, and Modium. Okay? That red dot, Modium, that's where the rebellion takes place. If you have some time, go home and type in your Google machine, the Sabbath Day Massacre. Just read up, Sabbath Day Massacre. And since I've given you something to read about, if you have a chance, look up 1 Maccabees 2 and read verses 42 through 70. This is supposedly the last speech that Matthias ever gave in his entire life. It may or may not be accurate. I don't know. But it's a fun read. And he does a good job, buddy. If you want to get fired up, basically saying our Father has fought against insurmountable odds. Because if you think about it, he's going to be fighting against Antiochus, and they're going to be going up against somebody they cannot win against. They can't beat the Seleucid Empire. Basically, he says in this speech, it's better for us to die for our faith than to apostatize and make these sacrifices. And so next week we'll talk about that. All right, that's our class for tonight. The persecution, if you think about it, if that Roman, I've always wondered, if that Roman delegation hadn't showed up on the way to Egypt, and that proconsul doing what he did, drawing that circle and putting Antiochus in the middle of that circle, and Antiochus turning around and headed back towards Jerusalem and finding those Jews in Jerusalem dancing and parading and celebrating what they thought was his death. I mean, you take dominoes, right? You let one domino go and they just start falling, right? The point that I wanted you to take home with you tonight is that a lot of us, and I've done it, we read about how Jews viewed Gentiles and we think, man, these people are racist. How could you ever be so hateful towards a group of people? How could you ever think of Gentiles this way? Listen, when people were responsible for killing your loved ones for hundreds of years, do you just snap your finger and forget all that and just because they walked in the church building? Just like Saul. People don't realize when Saul became a Christian, do you think that Christians immediately just went, oh yeah, he's good now? There had to have been some anxiety, right? I just wanted you to see part of what built up to this Jew-Gentile. They've got to accept the Gentiles. But there was a deep-heated disdain for Gentiles, and that was going to be present during the days of Jesus and afterwards because of what they'd gone through during this time period. Any questions?
You see where the food thing would be a big deal after having the temple desecrated.
Yeah, Romans 14:15, right?
Huge, yeah.
Yeah. Paul spent a lot of time trying to get Jews and Gentiles on the same page. That's much of what Romans is dealing with. So thank y'all very, very much. So let's close out with a prayer, and I'll let y'all hopefully get home before the storms are too bad. Father, I'm just grateful to you for giving us your love and your grace and just sustaining us the way you do, getting us here safely tonight. And I pray, Father, for that safety on the way home. Be with our class, Father. Be with us in the things that we've studied. I know, Father, there are some tough things to hear, some things that are challenging, maybe even what we thought before about people in the first century and why they thought certain ways and did things a certain way. It's hard for us who didn't live through that time period to know exactly why they thought the way they did, but forgiveness. Father, your son is the author of forgiveness, and he was able to take two people that were living in complete disunity and make them one body in Christ. And that, I pray, Father, that we would learn that lesson. Help us, Father, to see these things and understand that we too can be one body in Jesus Christ, that you made us unified. We didn't make ourselves unified. Our goal, our job, Father, is to maintain that unity and the bond of peace. Help us, Father, to see these things the way you would have us to see them. Father, be with us again as we leave here. Keep us safe as we make our way homes, and give us an opportunity to continue to serve you with good health and opportunity. So, Jesus, that we pray. Amen. Thank y'all.
Thank you.